Imagine standing at a beautiful wedding ceremony, the air filled with love, laughter, and the scent of fresh flowers. The bride, glowing in her stunning white dress, locks eyes with the groom, dressed sharply in black. Family and friends gather around, phones raised, ready to capture the couple's happiest moment. Everything seems picture perfect until something completely unexpected happens, something no one could have imagined. The groom, in the heat of the moment, suddenly does something that leaves everyone gasping in disbelief. A loud slap echoes through the ceremony, and all eyes turn toward the couple at the center of the chaos. The bride stands there stunned, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. The crowd falls into an uneasy silence as whispers ripple through the guests. What could possibly drive a man to do such a thing at his own wedding, in front of friends, family, and loved ones? Was it a terrible misunderstanding or a moment of emotional turmoil? As tension thickens in the air, guests are left wondering what might happen next. But here's where the story takes an even more unexpected turn. The bride, who moments ago seemed paralyzed with shock, does something that no one saw coming. It's a twist that turns the entire situation on its head and changes the course of the day forever. Stay tuned as we unravel this shocking yet unbelievable story, revealing the powerful truth behind what happened at this unforgettable wedding. You won't want to miss the twists and turns coming up next. Just moments before the shocking incident, the atmosphere had been joyful. The couple was standing at the altar, surrounded by friends and family who had traveled from near and far to witness this special day. The bride, with her elegant gown shimmering in the afternoon light, wore a smile that radiated pure happiness. The groom looked proud and confident, his eyes filled with love as he glanced at the woman who was about to become his wife. They had met a few years earlier, an unlikely pairing according to some. Their love story had faced its fair share of challenges. Coming from different backgrounds, they knew the journey wouldn't always be easy, but they never let those differences define them. What brought them together was stronger than anything that could pull them apart, or so everyone thought. As the ceremony unfolded, there were no signs of the tension that was about to explode. The couple exchanged vows, their voices steady despite the emotions running high. Guests wiped tears of joy from their eyes, already imagining the beautiful life this couple would build together. But then, just as the officiant began to pronounce them husband and wife, something shifted. The groom's expression darkened, as though a sudden wave of emotion had overtaken him. Those closest to the couple noticed it first, a tightening of his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. The bride, unaware of the brewing storm, continued to smile, lost in the magic of the moment. The crowd remained blissfully unaware too, until the unthinkable happened. That slap wasn't just a sound. It was a ripple that shattered the joyous mood and left everyone frozen in disbelief. Gasps echoed through the crowd, followed by an eerie silence. Guests exchanged shocked glances, unsure whether they had just witnessed a horrible mistake or something far more complicated. But why? What could have possibly triggered such an outburst during what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives? Was there something hidden beneath the surface of this picture-perfect couple that no one had seen before? As guests stood stunned, waiting for someone to break the silence, all eyes remained fixed on the bride. Her face was unreadable for a moment, shock mingled with something else that no one could quite place. Then, just as it seemed like time had stopped, the bride took a slow, deliberate breath. And what she did next left everyone in awe. It was a move no one expected, one that would change the story entirely. But we're not there just yet. Stay with us, because things are about to get even more unpredictable. The guests at the wedding couldn't believe what they had just seen. Conversations that had once been filled with laughter were now hushed whispers. Mothers clutched their pearls, wide-eyed with disbelief. Friends exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or simply wait for the dust to settle. Some thought it might be a strange joke gone horribly wrong, while others sensed a deeper story hidden beneath the surface. The groom stood there, breathing heavily, clearly struggling with whatever had driven him to such an outburst. His hands trembled at his sides as though he himself couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. He stole a glance at the bride, perhaps expecting tears or an angry outburst. But what he saw instead was something that made him take a step back. The bride was calm. Too calm. There was no sobbing, no frantic reaction. Her expression had hardened, a steely determination replacing the earlier shock. It was as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life, though no one knew why. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering and strong. There was a quiet power in her gaze, one that unsettled not just the groom, but everyone who was watching. The tension was unbearable. The crowd wanted answers, but the bride remained silent. She took a small, deliberate step forward, her gown trailing elegantly behind her. It was the kind of movement that commanded attention without a single word being spoken. Meanwhile, whispers spread like wildfire among the guests. Did they have a fight before the ceremony? Someone asked. Maybe it's just nerves, another guest offered hopefully, though even they didn't sound convinced. One older woman shook her head solemnly. "There's more to this story," she muttered under her breath. Even the wedding officiant looked unsure of what to do next. He fumbled with his book, glancing nervously between the couple. The usual flow of a wedding ceremony had been completely disrupted, leaving everyone standing in awkward uncertainty. But just when it seemed like the tension couldn't get any thicker, a new twist began to unfold. A man from the groom's side of the family stepped forward, his face tight with concern. He whispered something to the groom, who shook his head vehemently in response. Whatever was being said clearly struck a nerve. The groom's face turned red with frustration, and he clenched his fists, as though struggling to contain himself. The bride, however, didn't flinch. Instead, she remained rooted in place, unyielding and composed. It was clear she had no intention of backing down, no matter what came next. Something big was brewing, something that had yet to be revealed. And as the guests continued to hold their breath, waiting for what would happen next, one thing was certain. This wedding was far from over. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing second, thick with tension that pressed down on everyone present. The once beautiful ceremony had transformed into an unpredictable standoff that left guests shifting uneasily in their seats. Some whispered nervously, while others stood frozen, unable to look away from the scene unfolding in front of them. The groom's family member, who had spoken to him earlier, now stood off to the side, watching with a mix of frustration and unease. Whatever private conversation had taken place was clearly unresolved. The groom's face was flushed, his jaw clenched tight as he fought to maintain composure. But despite his best efforts, the frustration bubbling beneath the surface was impossible to hide. Meanwhile, the bride remained unnervingly calm, her expression unreadable. Her eyes stayed locked on the groom, as if daring him to explain himself. There was no panic, no retreat, just a quiet, commanding presence that left everyone wondering what was going through her mind. It was in that moment of heavy silence that someone from the bride's side of the family decided to step forward. An older woman with a graceful yet commanding presence, perhaps an aunt or close family friend, made her way toward the couple. Her expression was stern, but her voice was calm as she addressed the bride. "Do you want me to step in?" she asked softly, her words just loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. The bride shook her head ever so slightly, her lips pressed into a firm line. Whatever was happening between her and the groom, it was clear she intended to handle it herself. The groom shifted uncomfortably under the weight of all the staring eyes. It was as though the entire world had zoomed in on him, dissecting his every move. His confidence, so evident at the start of the ceremony, had been chipped away by the relentless pressure of the moment. As whispers continued to spread through the crowd, new questions began to emerge. What's their history? One guest muttered. Do you think this was building up for a while? Another asked. Theories flew around like wildfire, each more dramatic than the last. Then, just as it seemed like the situation couldn't get any more intense, the bride took a step forward. Her movement was slow and deliberate, every inch of her radiating a sense of power and control. The groom visibly tensed, clearly uncertain about what was coming next. The guests collectively held their breath, anticipation hanging thick in the air. Whatever was about to happen, they knew it would be a turning point, one that no one would ever forget. Just as everyone braced themselves for the bride's next move, an unexpected voice cut through the heavy silence. Wait. It was a young woman from the crowd, standing near the back. Her face was flushed, and she looked as though she'd been struggling with whether to speak up or not. But now that the words had escaped her lips, there was no turning back. All eyes turned to her, the tension in the air shifting like a sudden gust of wind. The bride's steady composure wavered ever so slightly, her brow furrowing in confusion. The groom's expression, however, was a mix of shock and dread. Whatever this woman was about to say, it was clear he knew it wouldn't be good. I need to say something, the woman insisted, her voice trembling but resolute. She stepped forward, ignoring the murmurs spreading through the guests like wildfire. This isn't what it looks like. There's something you all need to know. The groom's face turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He took a step toward the woman, raising a hand as if to silence her. Don't, he warned through gritted teeth, his voice low but desperate. But the woman stood her ground, refusing to back down. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, she said firmly, her voice gaining strength. The crowd was in utter disbelief. Guests leaned forward, eager to catch every word. The bride, who had been the picture of calm and control just moments ago, now looked genuinely bewildered. Her lips parted as if to ask a question, but she stopped herself, waiting instead to hear what the woman had to say. The woman took a shaky breath. I wasn't going to come here today, she admitted, glancing nervously at the crowd. But after everything that's happened, I couldn't stay quiet. There are things about this man, she pointed directly at the groom, that none of you know. Gasps rippled through the guests. People whispered furiously, trying to piece together what was happening. The groom's face was now a mask of anger and panic, his carefully crafted image crumbling before everyone's eyes. The bride's expression hardened once again, her confusion giving way to a look of fierce determination. Whatever this woman was about to reveal, the bride was ready to face it head-on. She squared her shoulders, standing tall amidst the chaos. The stakes had just been raised to an entirely new level, and the guests knew they were witnessing something that would leave lasting echoes well beyond this single day. As the young woman prepared to speak the truth, no one could predict the explosive consequences that were about to unfold. The crowd was on edge, barely breathing as the young woman stood firm, ready to reveal whatever secret she had carried to this wedding. The bride's eyes remained fixed on her, filled with quiet strength and curiosity, while the groom stood frozen, caught between fear and desperation. Time seemed to slow, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone like a heavy fog. I loved him once, the woman began, her voice clear now, echoing across the stunned gathering. And I believed every word he told me, just like you probably did, she said, glancing at the bride. Her words landed like thunder, shaking the very foundation of the ceremony. The bride's face remained composed, but there was a flicker of realization in her eyes, as if pieces of a puzzle had suddenly snapped into place. The groom opened his mouth to protest, but the woman cut him off sharply. "You promised me forever," she said bitterly, "but you walked away without a second thought. And now here you are, trying to rewrite the same story with someone else. But there's one thing you didn't count on." A murmur swept through the crowd, guests exchanging bewildered glances. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to slice through. The groom clenched his fists, clearly struggling to maintain control, but the truth had already begun to slip beyond his grasp. "What are you talking about?" the bride asked calmly, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The woman took a deep breath, her expression softening as she addressed the bride directly. "I'm not here to ruin your day," she said. "I'm here to warn you. He's not the man you think he is. He hides who he really is until it's too late. I thought I'd never heal after what he did to me, but I made it through. And I just couldn't let you walk into this without knowing the truth." A hush fell over the crowd. The weight of her words lingered in the air, raw and undeniable. The bride's gaze shifted from the woman to the groom, who stood silently, his face contorted in shame. But what happened next shocked everyone. The bride, instead of crumbling under the weight of betrayal, straightened her shoulders and let out a soft, almost defiant laugh. "Thank you for telling me," she said warmly to the woman. "But I already knew." The crowd gasped, stunned by the revelation. Even the groom's eyes widened in disbelief. "I was never going to marry him," the bride continued confidently, her voice ringing clear. "This whole ceremony, it was my way of giving him exactly what he deserves, a public reckoning." The guests were speechless, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The bride turned to the officiant and smiled. "Looks like the wedding's off," she said cheerfully. With grace and dignity, she walked away from the altar, leaving the groom standing alone, exposed for who he truly was. The young woman who had spoken out followed close behind, a silent symbol of shared strength and victory. And just like that, what had started as a picture-perfect wedding ended as a lesson in courage, truth, and the power of walking away. The guests stood in stunned silence, unsure whether to clap, cheer, or simply process what had just unfolded. Slowly, whispers rippled through the crowd, disbelief mixing with admiration for the bride's unexpected strength. Some shook their heads in shock, while others wore small, satisfied smiles as though they'd just witnessed justice being served. The groom, still rooted to the spot, looked like a man who had lost everything. His carefully curated image lay shattered on the ground, and there was no recovering from the public humiliation. The officiant awkwardly cleared his throat, clearly uncertain about how to proceed with a ceremony that had just dramatically imploded. Meanwhile, the bride moved gracefully through the sea of stunned faces, her confidence radiating like a beacon. Friends and family from her side quickly gathered around, offering words of support and admiration. "You handled that beautifully," one friend whispered, squeezing her hand. "Thanks," the bride said with a soft smile. "It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't let today be about regret. It was about freedom." The young woman who had spoken up earlier hesitated near the edge of the crowd, unsure whether she should stay or quietly slip away. But before she could decide, the bride called out to her. "Hey," she said warmly, walking over. "Thank you for your courage. You didn't owe me anything, but you showed up anyway." "I just didn't want you to go through what I did," the woman admitted quietly. "I'm sorry if I ruined things." "You didn't ruin anything," the bride assured her. "You helped me end something that should have never started." The two women shared a moment of mutual understanding, their connection born out of shared strength rather than pain. For them, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something better. As the guests began to disperse, conversations shifted from shock to admiration. People were already recounting the dramatic turn of events, their words laced with respect for the bride's bravery. What had started as a scandalous scene had transformed into an inspiring tale of self-respect and empowerment. By the time the bride reached the exit, laughter echoed through the venue, breaking the tension that had gripped everyone earlier. "I guess I've got a party to attend, even if it's not a wedding," she said with a playful grin to her friends. The crowd began to cheer, their voices full of support and celebration. It was clear that the bride's bold decision had sparked a sense of liberation, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. In the end, the day wasn't remembered for what went wrong, but for what went right. A story of courage, truth, and the undeniable power of standing up for yourself. And as the bride walked away with her head held high, she carried the lesson that life, just like love, is best when lived on your own terms.